must feel an awful sense of guilt.
Stay away from me.
What are you doing now?
What are you?
Welcome back, Screenaholics, to another review. Today we are reviewing Men, which just came out in theaters. It is the newest A24 film out. All I can say is, wow, this movie is awesome. Like, if you're a fan of A24, if you like those really slow burn but yet intense horror films that A24 tends to pump out, whether it's Ari Aster, whether it's Robert Eggers, those just movies that kind of stick with you and have a lot of meaning, then you will like this movie. It is gruesome. It has great storytelling. It has really, really great cinematography. It has everything that you want in an A24 film. And it's automatically probably in my top 10 of A24 films easily. I mean, probably getting close to top 5. I really took away a lot from it. And this movie is just great. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Every single thing you guys do helps out this channel and helps it keep growing. And then comment down below if you've seen Men, and if you have, let me know what you thought of it. You know, I'm sure it's not for everybody. I know they marketed this movie on like TV and stuff, and I'm sure there were people who went and seen it and probably thought they were just going into it as like a normal horror movie, but in reality, probably got set up into going and seeing a movie that was an A24 film that, you know, they probably weren't expecting to see. But hey, you know, if you did go see it and you did like it, please let me know. If you didn't, let me know why you didn't like it. I would love to hear your comments. Now, Men, like I said, it just came out in 2022. It's only been in theaters for a couple of weeks. And it was directed by Alex Garland. Now, if you don't know who Alex Garland is, he has done A24 films before. He did Ex Machina, which is a really, really good A24 film that came out. Love that movie so much. He also did Annihilation, which is another really good film. And he was also the writer on 28 Days Later. So yes, he wrote that movie, which was one of the best horror movies ever made. It is starring Jessie Buckley as Harper. If I'm pronouncing this wrong, then please correct me. Papa Asaidu, I think his name is. He plays James, which is her ex-husband. And then Roy Keener, he plays Joffrey, plus a bunch of other characters that we'll get into in a bit. He kind of has a bunch of roles, but his main role is Jeffrey or Joffrey, whichever way you want to pronounce it. This is a movie set in England. Now, before I get into like any spoilers or anything like that, I do want to say that this movie is very graphic. It is rated R. It is a very artsy A24 horror film. If you know anything about that, you know that they're pretty graphic. They do have a lot of graphic scenes in them. And so if you are not over 18, or if you have a squeamish stomach, or you just don't like violence or like anything that in general, like gore, and also nudity, I would say this probably isn't the movie for you and stay away from it. Outside of that, yeah, it is very gory. There is a lot of nudity in it, especially male nudity. I think that's exclusively male nudity. And it is a very, very in-your-face type of film for being such a slow burn kind of A24 storytelling movie. Now, there are 3 kind of premises to this movie that I kind of broke down in my head as I was watching it. And I kind of want to go through each one of those as far as like a premise, also a plot, you know, some of the meanings behind them, and break down each 3 individually throughout this video. And the first is like kind of the main premise of what they're kind of telling you in this movie. And kind of like the obvious, you know, the obvious one that kind of everybody took away from the name of this movie, Men, is that this movie is essentially about how men suck. Like, being honest, like that's literally on the surface level what this movie is about. Like, it's just about how men do really horrible things and treat women very horribly. And that is pretty much what this whole entire movie is about in its base core. Now, there's the main premise, though, which is different from just all of that. That's the overarching spectrum of what it means, is that the men are bad. But what is like this main premise? Like, what is the main storyline built off of? And that really has to do with like PTSD and guilt. And we'll get more into this in a little bit when I start breaking down what actually happens in the movie. But a lot of this movie does have to do with PTSD. It has to do with guilt, coping, abusive relationships. It really has to do with that. Like that's the core of this movie. Yes, it does have to do with men doing horrible things, but you know, when you look into it and find its core, you know, it does have to do with coping with those emotions, how to handle that kind of PTSD with abusive relationships. And as a woman, what you go through and what you're put through in relationships like that, and how when you come out the other side, it affects you inside of your soul, inside of your head. And then lastly, there is a third kind of lower subliminal meaning in this whole entire movie, and it sort of has to do with religion, or I would say sin, and then also kind of like these old ancient deities within English culture. Again, we will get into that in a little bit about what those things mean and where they fit in the movie, but really at the base of it, at the very bottom, in this like kind of subliminal little messages throughout the whole entire thing, including one of the very first scenes where she eats an apple from a tree that she picks and is automatically told by one of the men, is that, you know, oh, you shouldn't have done that, you know, the forbidden fruit. And he said he was just joking.
Apple from the garden?
Yeah, it was delicious.
No. Mustn't do that. Forbidden fruit.
Oh, God, sorry,
I'm joking.
Oh.
But there are little tiny details throughout this whole entire movie having to do with like sin and, you know, who is a natural sinner, or are women natural sinners, and they're doing these things where, you know, they are making the men kind of like push that on the woman, saying that, hey, like, you know, you are a sinner, you do these really horrible things, and you make us do these things, and because you're a sinner. And that was kind of like the subliminal message, and it wasn't really in your face, but it was kind of there the whole time, just in little tiny bits and pieces. Now, again, with the three kind of premises, there are three plots to this movie in essential that kind of come together and make this movie what it is. The first kind of main plot to the movie is, again, the same thing as like, okay, these men are horrible, and like all these men are horrible. And after what happens to Harper in this movie at the beginning and periodically through flashbacks throughout the movie that you find out, it causes a lot of stress and trauma on her. And then she starts to see Jeffrey's character, who is the main guy at the house when she gets this house. And then she starts to see his face and all the other men. And she doesn't notice it, though. It's not pointed out in the movie that this guy who plays Jeffrey is playing everybody in the whole entire movie. But you start to see the sense of like, oh, well, she's seeing men as all the same. As like every single one of these men throughout the movie who are doing these horrendous things are essentially the same person, which is one man, which is essentially just men in general. The second plot to this, kind of like the main plot, again with like going with the PTSD and everything of that nature having to do with like the psychological side, is her just abusive relationship that is shown with her and James as their divorce. Now, at the beginning of the movie, it kind of dabbles a little bit into this, and it talks about how, you know, her and James are fighting, and it shows that, and she threatens a divorce, and James, you know, pretty much replies as in, you know, if you divorce me, I don't want to live anymore. And she just starts crying, and she says, you can't put that on me. That's unfair. That is abusive to put on me. That you're going to threaten that and put that on me. And, you know, he comes back with this, you know, you're the one who has to live with this. You're the one who has to live with this. And it kind of is this whole entire conversation built around, you know, these are normal things that women go through every single day. And not just women, men too. People in relationships in general. There are people who do this all the time. And it's extremely abusive to do something like that. And it kind of puts you forefront into that whole entire headspace of, you know, going back and forth, this realistic conversation about this topic of, oh, well, they're splitting up, and then one is threatening to do this, and then saying it's their fault, when realistically it's not their fault. Now, like the third kind of subliminal plot, and again, it goes with like the religion and the sin and stuff like that, was these symbols that had to do with these ancient kind of deities or symbols within English culture. One called the Green Man, and the other, if I'm pronouncing this wrong, I'm so sorry. It's such a weird word. It's hyphenated. It's She-Na-Gig, I believe it is. The Green Man is kind of like this symbol of fertility. It is a symbol of rebirth. That you'll see around at certain times in like English culture. It's kind of like this head that has like, you know, I don't know, branches or leaves, and it kind of looks like a sun a little bit with a face in the middle of it. And you'll see that periodically through the movie, along with this symbol of the She-Na-Gig, which is I'm not going to go into full detail of what this is because it's YouTube. But it's a woman who is unclothed, and she is, doing stuff. And that's also supposed to be a symbol of fertility, or has been represented as lust. And so you see this back and forth the whole entire time, showing these different symbols, and obviously like some of that coming out in the characters. And so you start to get this idea of what this subliminal message having to do with the sin and having to do with like the religion part of it, and what it means for like these guys to be rebirthed, and how the woman is just viewed as a lustful being and a sinner. Now that we broke down all of that, I can kind of get into like spoiler territory. You know, I kind of have already spoiled a little bit of stuff, but not too much stuff. And here's my breakdown of like the whole entire movie in general as quick as possible, because it is only an hour-and-a-half movie, which is awesome for an A24 film. You know, most A24 horror films run for anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours. They're going to be long draws. The Lighthouse was one of my favorite movies of all time, but it is extremely long and slow. In this movie, it is sort of that, but it also isn't. You know, once you start getting into it, it is moving fairly quickly, and I like the hour-and-a-half runtime. I felt like that was perfect. It didn't need anything over-explained. It was just right in your face, and just good enough to tell the story in that amount of time. Now, as I said before, Harper, the main woman character, pretty much the only woman character in this movie, outside of her friend who she FaceTimes and shows up at the end of the movie, is singularity the main character of this whole entire movie. And she pretty much has just gotten out of an abusive relationship with her ex-husband, who she threatened to divorce, and he went along and ended up taking his own life. Now, because of that, she had to get away, so she went and stayed in this like little cottage out in the countryside in England. And one of the things I noticed first when she got there was, yes, she met Jeffrey when she first got there, and Jeffrey let her in and showed her the house and showed her around the property and seemed really nice. He was making jokes, he was asking about her life, and he seemed like a very genuine, sweet guy. Just a little bit odd, but just like kind of a goofster, you know, like a guy who liked to, you know, make jokes and just have a good time and just be a genuinely pretty nice person. Now, she does leave the house and she's going on a walk, and there's these beautiful cinematic scenes of her just walking in the woods, and there's like branches and all of this greenery that is around her, and she's stopping and looking through leaves. And I saw that as like symbolism of her becoming free, almost, you know, of this abusive relationship, that she was branching out, that she was blooming and becoming this person that she always wanted to be. She didn't feel like she was held down, and she was out in nature. And that's about the only scene in this entire movie that makes you feel good. After that, it just all cuts away and all starts going crazy. This is right when you start to see the men all over her property with the different faces. And there's these little flashbacks that go back to her and James's relationship the same day everything happened. And, you know, it goes through them fighting, her crying, their just arguments. And at one point, James does strike her. And that's like the breaking point for her, where she forces him out of the room. And that's when you find out right after that is what he did. And so that also layers in with that. This whole entire movie is pretty much set around that little cottage and the town next to it for like a scene. Now, all the men that she sees, again, are the same person. She doesn't notice it. I don't think it's supposed to be said in the movie. I think it's just supposed to be implied. I don't think they were actually like the same person in the real world. It was just supposed to be a cinematic choice that like kind of shows how she's seeing men in general as all the same person. It starts off with Jeffrey. Then there's a naked man who is like sort of stalking her and comes in her yard, tries to break into the house. And he is the same person as Jeffrey, essentially just naked. And then there's a police officer that's the same guy. There's a priest that's the same guy. There's a little kid that's the same guy. There's bar patrons that are the same guy. Literally everybody in this movie is the same person. And what you see throughout the movie is that all of these men who try to interact with her end up doing something wrong or just being horrible in general throughout the movie, and not even like horrific scenes, just implied that they're like just being scummy people. One of those being the priest. You know, she's outside of this church. She goes to this church to kind of like cope with her feelings and scream and cry with all of the stuff going on inside of her head. And when she walks outside, there's a little boy who has that same face, which is very odd to see. It is a very odd choice. But he is very rude to her, almost like a kid would be. He curses at her because he asks her to play hide and seek. She says no, and he gets mad about it, which is, again, another symbolizing way of saying, hey, you know, you're a guy. You ask a girl to do something and she doesn't want to. She tells you no, and you get all butthurt about it and act like she's the bad person for doing that. But then like a priest comes and he sits her down and is talking to her, and he puts his hand on her knee or leg or thigh. And you can just tell from there it's starting to get really kind of weird and just like uncomfortable. And he begins to like tell her like, oh y'all, you're the reason that this happened. You're the reason why he took his own life. And again, putting the blame back on the victim and making her feel bad for what happened. And like I said, periodically this happens throughout the movie. The police officer ends up letting the guy go and out of jail, who was essentially stalking her and tried to break into her house. And when she asked about it, she was like, the dude is like trying to break into my house, and like he followed me out of the woods. Why did he get let go? And the officer was like, yeah, you'll be fine. Like, just, you know, don't worry about it. If he comes back, tell me. Just pretty much shrugging off and gaslighting her emotions, essentially, in the way that she feels. Now, this is pretty much the entire movie, outside of like, I'd say like the last 30 minutes. And the last 30 minutes are just pure chaos. It just breaks down into all the men trying to simultaneously attack her at once. You don't know who's who, you don't know what's what, you just know that it's the same person and different people trying to attack her. And just, it pretty much turns into a home invasion film after that, but very gruesome, very adult in your face over images and reasonings behind stuff happening. And there's not too much to break down other than the fact that it's just very gruesome and very forward about the message that it's pushing about how she just does not want any of these people around her. You don't really get a full understanding of what's going on and why they need her. I know it has something to do with the symbols of what we talked about earlier, but there isn't really a forward message about what is going on and why they necessarily want this woman. But it is inherently just saying these men are doing terrible things to this woman when she is just wanting to live her life after experiencing this horrible tragedy in her life. Now, that's about it. You know, I'm not going to break down every single scene. I'm not going to give away a lot of stuff. All I can say is that this movie is very good. I really, really like it. I like the plot of it. I like the subliminal stuff in it. It is very A24. There is a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of great cinematography, great score, great acting, great storytelling. It is everything you want in an A24 film. It's still in theaters, so just go out and see it if you can. You know, it's worth a watch if you're into that type of movie for sure. I'm going to end this one with a 4 out of 5 bottles. I think it was great. I absolutely loved it. Probably one of the best films to come out in 2022 so far, and especially horror-wise, probably in the top 3 best horror movies to come out in 2022. I would say, in my opinion, X and this are blown out of the water as far as the best horror to come out this year so far. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will be back with another review very soon. Thank you.